At this point, I've covered 737 Famicom games, so I do not take it lightly when I say Zoids Mokushiroku is one of the worst games I've played. It is badly designed, it is fundamentally broken, it is nigh unplayable if you engage with it in the way that the designers seemingly wanted you to, and once you know the one weird trick to it, you can't even play the game with 2 players. It is utterly wretched. But first, let me talk about Zoids. It's a toy line featuring models of mechanical dinosaurs and other creatures. And naturally, there's a backstory of 2 warring factions who use them against each other. There have been 2 previous Zoids games on the Famicom, weird creations that attempted to merge a Dragon Quest-style RPG with really awful action combat. Both of those were designed by Micronix, the game developer responsible for many of the worst things on the Famicom, and I think they might be the better Zoids games. Zoids Mokushiroku is the first Famicom game published by Tomy, who made the toy line. While I can't say that every game by Tomy is going to be bad, they have made a lot of awful games over the years. The concept of this Zoids game is that an object fell from the sky and has triggered devastating earthquakes around the world. But war never changes. And so the 2 factions are continuing their battles despite that. When you start the game up, you pick your faction, there's no difference between them, and then you pick one of 3 commanders from that faction. Again, no difference between them. I chose the coolest guy, who was the one smoking the cigarette. You also have a choice on whether or not the commander units will be flagged. The goal is always to defeat the commander unit, so without that you're just pounding on everyone until you get lucky. The final option is whether or not you want to play in turn-based or real-time mode. The default is real-time, and that's how it's supposed to be played. In turn-based mode you just pick one of your units, move it 1 square, and then the AI does the same. In real-time you do that, except you can take as many turns as you like. When 2 units come together, it's time to battle. And here you'll discover 2 things. First, the AI is horrible. Second, to make up for that, your weapons are almost totally ineffectual. Battles play out as an action game where you move around from an overhead view and hit the A button to shoot your weapon. If the Zoids collide together, then they bounce off, and you'll often find yourself teleported to the other side of them at an instant. If you see P markers on the ground, those will recover a bit of health. The AI in these scenes generally tries to head towards you, but can't really get around obstacles. But it can dump a mountain of ammunition on you. I didn't count how many direct hits it takes from your weapons to destroy an enemy, but I'd say a rule of thumb is that you do about 2 points of damage with every hit, and enemies generally have over 100 hit points. The best thing you can do if you wind up in one of these scenes is to hide behind some terrain. So you should keep your units on forests when they're getting close to the enemy, and you should attack enemy units when they're on the forests. On the strategic map, there are periodic earthquakes that will change a bit of the land, randomly making a piece of land grow out of the water, rise into a mountain, or crumble away entirely. It's always the same tiles that will be affected by these earthquakes, so you'll basically have paths open and close at random as you play. There are also 3 special tiles that you can interact with on that map. First, there are neutral units that you can recruit just by walking on top of them. They're not necessarily the same unit that you see grayed out, and you won't know what you get until you walk on top of it. Second, there are these repair cranes. When you enter one of those squares, the unit recovers 20 hit points. And if it remains there for a certain amount of time, it'll recover another 10. However, you could, instead of just waiting, walk off of it and then walk right back onto it again, recovering 20 hit points. If you ever need to restore a unit to full health, you should do that. And then there are the game breakers. Okay, the game was broken before, but these reduce Zoids Mokushiroku into a mindless exercise. When you collect the missiles, that unit gets a 2 placed below it. Then when you select that unit, if instead of moving to another square, you just hit the A button on it again, you have the opportunity to fire missiles at any unit in range. That takes you to this very different combat scene. Here the map is divided in half, and only missiles can cross that barrier. If the AI gets missiles, it sits at the back edge of that screen and fires wildly. If you aren't at the very front of yours, then it can't hit you. So they're totally useless when the AI has them. On the other hand, if you get them, then the AI has a tendency to freeze up once it's hit, and you can just pound it with missiles until time runs out. Now that's useful, but because of the damage disparity, you're unlikely to defeat an enemy in one barrage of missiles. So what you do is you mash the A button over and over again, and you instantaneously reselect that same unit, and start another missile barrage before the AI has even had an opportunity to move. And so you sit there and repeat this action until the enemy unit is destroyed. And there's not a thing it can do to break this loop. And when playing 2 players, the way that you break this loop is by punching the other player for being a jerk. Once you've caught on to this strategy by doing the complicated task of using the missiles once, there's no point in playing the game anymore. Then it just becomes run over to the missiles and bombard anything that comes at you. Shockingly, in Japan, this game does not have any fans. The few people who care to remember it point to Zoids Mokushiroku as being one of the low points of the franchise. I think my own view on this game is pretty clear at this point. I could go on and on about how mechanically things don't fit together, how the real-time portions just are a mess, how the attempts to patch over the bad AI, which is also in the strategic component, has just made the game even worse. Zoids Mokushiroku is a bottom-tier game. There is no enjoyment to be found in this one.